Hey everyone, I'm Will and welcome to another video. In this one, I want you to join my buddy and I, Dylan, as we head out into the New Zealand backcountry to photograph some beautiful waterfall and rainforest scenes. When I first picked up a camera, waterfalls were the main subject I was drawn to, and I got to tell you, I've definitely learnt a lot from that very first shoot, about 14 years later until now. One of the challenges you can face with this type of environment is that dynamic range, struggling with the backlight and how to get the colors out. So at the end of the video, I want to show you one of the raw files and how I approach processing this type of scenery. I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for your support. All right, let's get in the field and then we'll have a look at some of the raw files on the computer.
Hey!
Boots don't have much grip.
How was that trip?
Bit of a slip, mate.
The sun is just getting into that nice angle where it will soon drop its light off the trees, and look at that angle there. In the meantime, just exploring and following the stream. Every now and then you just hit a rock that is like ice. Keeps you humble when you fall down. Scouting potential compositions. A little bit too much light still. It's all in that background, and the light just too much in the trees, so it makes the trees feel very chaotic. We only need another 20 minutes or so. In the meantime, keep walking. Wow, look at this section. Very slippery. Trying to have 3 points of contact. Oh wow. How exciting, look at this. Beautiful waterfall. Got the sun just above it. Amazing timing. The sun is just going to track along. If we go over there into the direct light, we'll probably get some beams as well. It's quite a simple frame if you're so close there, just getting the green pool. I love the cascades, so we'll go back and get the cascades in that mid-ground area. Much nicer with that rolling water in the front. We'll just see what we can get in the immediate foreground. Have a look at this composition right here. Large boulder on the right, this one on the left, flow through the middle straight towards the fore with the light. As that light comes around, we should pick up more beams as well, the mist. Wow. We planned a few other shots, but we didn't plan this one, and that is just as good as it gets with the light. Now, this is where you can get a sun star. You've got to be careful with the sun stars. You don't want them too big and obnoxious in the frame. I just think it has a very digital feel to it. So you can just experiment and do some frames with one, some without, and all you need to do is just move the position of the lens Oh man, how good. Look at the timing on that light. Seriously. It's starting to beam up, look at the mist. Getting a little bit technical here, trying to incorporate a natural frame. Look at the fern curving over. A little hint of the river there, the fall in the middle. The problem is the wind. We want a slow shutter to smooth the water out, but we need a fast shutter for the fern. So I'm using a bracketing mode and firing off 3 different exposures consecutively at different shutter speeds, 3 stops apart. So basically I'm doing an exposure at a 20th, 1/5, and then an 80th. And it will have to be a blend to put it all together. It's the only option you have when you have the wind moving your greens around. Exposure bracketing. And then wait for the gust obviously to die down and have a go. Just like a good sunrise or sunset, when you time the light right in the forest or in a cascade location like this, it's really the pinnacle, to be honest. Absolutely incredible. It's really dropped into the right height here the last half an hour. Unlimited possibility. Returning to a spot that we scouted earlier in the day now. Alright guys, that is a big day. Making our way out. Believe it or not, it's almost 9 o'clock. 9 p.m. When you've been using the camera for 5 hours straight, you start to get mentally fatigued and hungry. So we head back to civilization now.
Alright, welcome back. That was such a beautiful, fun shoot. I've got a couple of files here that we'll look at. These are the 2 that I put in the video, my 2 favorites from the shoot. This panorama here, which is a pretty simple, traditional type composition. And then, of course, having a look at this other image. Now, I got to admit, these aren't 100% processed. One of the challenges I have with running a YouTube channel is getting the edits done to have them in the video. It's just, I don't like rushing the edits. I don't know what it is with processing. I like to just take my time and I just slowly tweak the files, you know, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. Anyway, these are close enough to being finished, hence I'm putting it in the video. Now, one thing that I'll be doing on this frame is down the bottom right-hand corner. I'll zoom out actually, but yeah, down this bottom right-hand corner, there is that branch there, which is just a little blurred, and that would be from the slow shutter. It must have been moving in the breeze. Everything else has that infinite depth of field, which is what I like. So I'll probably end up cloning that guy out down in that bottom right-hand corner. I opted for the 16:9 ratio here, which is relatively kind of rare for me, but I just think it worked a lot better with this image. I didn't need all the garden down the bottom, and I didn't need any more of the sky up the top of the frame. So I went for that 16:9 there. The other file, this one here, I still need to work on the color a little more. But this is the one where I'm going to show you the raw, the before and after, and we'll talk about the dynamic range and the tonality. So I'll open up the Smart Object. This brings us back into Adobe Camera Raw, and I'll reset this edit now. You'll see how dark the file was and how different it was. Looking at the settings, I'm at F11, and F11 has allowed me to get that infinite depth of field. I'll brighten things up so you can see what's going on. So we're in focus all the way through from front to back, and 0.2 seconds. I did that to let some light in and also to get a nice drag on the water, especially in this mid-ground area where the flow was relatively slow. So you want a longer exposure there. I don't mind being faster on the cascades, but anyway, so I've opted for 0.2 at ISO 200. If you look at the file, it's very dark still. I've more or less exposed to make sure that I'm not losing too much of the highlight detail up here. And if you look at the histogram, you'll see we're just starting to clip the highlights. That's more than fine. I could have definitely shot a bit brighter as well, but as I do, I'll often just shoot it slightly darker and then bring up some of the details in the processing. Because if I wanted to let more light in now, the only option would have been to go slower on the shutter speed, which would have, in my opinion, just lost way too much detail on the waterfall. It would have been tricky because I shoot handheld as well. 0.2 is definitely getting into that extreme range for handheld photography, for myself anyway. And that's at 12mm. Otherwise, I could have put the ISO up, of course, but you know, sometimes I'd just rather do the adjustment here, and that's somewhat the equivalent of putting the ISO up. That's going to be minor consequence in doing such a big lift in the exposure because the ISO was so low to begin with. Now, so keep that in mind. When you're out shooting these scenes, don't be trying to get a bright exposure like this. If you're shooting in AV mode, this is one of the things that's going to happen. The camera is most likely going to be metering all down here in the dark zone and giving you a long exposure, maybe 1 or 2 seconds. And then the upper portion where all the light is just going to get completely blown out and you're going to lose that data. Now, of course, you can use exposure compensation if you're in AV mode. Personally, I just find it easier to be in manual mode and just adjust exactly what you want to adjust to get the result you're after. So it means you'll often be coming back with relatively dark files. If this is a new style of shooting for you, this is generally how digital photography works when you're shooting these backlit environments, sunrises, sunsets, or when the sun's going down behind an object like it is here. You've got a lot of bright tones and a lot of dark tones. If you use a smartphone, the smartphone's algorithm will do a quick edit to raise the shadows, just like this. It'll lift the shadows up, lift up the exposure, and then it'll bring the highlights down. And sometimes the smartphone will give a result like that where it starts to look a little bit cartoonish. That's because we've now got an unrealistic dynamic range. The challenge with digital photography is how do we maintain that realism but still reveal all the details so it's pleasing on the eye. You know, I want to be able to see a lot of those details up the top canopy here. I don't want those trees all blown out, but I don't want it so recovered that now all my highlights on the water and everything are no longer highlights. You know, that there's a difference here between that type of highlight, which is quite normal, and then if it's too recovered, it just becomes a mid-tone, and that's where the problem arises. So how would I approach a scene like this? Well, generally I'll do a landscape profile, that slightly tweaks the dynamic range and the colors, and then straight away I need to lift up that exposure. So let's say 1.25. I'm going to do a subtle highlight recovery and then a subtle shadow recovery. And now just for this particular image, I'm going to crop that bottom left. I just don't like that void down there. And I feel like that has a better balance, something like that. To start creating the depth and everything, one thing to consider, and you would have heard me mention this in other videos, is maintain higher contrast and deeper shadows close to the viewer, so close to the lens. And then as we transcend off into the distance, that's where we want to make those shadow details, the blacks, the contrast, reduced. And we'll get way more depth and separation in the file then. So I push K for an adjustment brush. And what I do here, I leave the feather flow and density at 100, so I have a very soft brush. And I begin with shadows and blacks, and I slowly increase these, or it's lifting the tones on them so they're not as dark. So the shadows, the blacks, they're not as dark as they were originally. And by doing this, we create a wonderful sense of depth, because that's how nature works. The atmosphere, it's going to show that off, the atmospheric perspective. And I slowly build up my layering like that. So I've done an application there in the far distance, and then maybe I'll do another adjustment in this midground here, like so. And I keep building those layers up and up and up. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go back several steps. I'm going to push cancel, reopen that, And you can see this one's a lot warmer. The warmth is from here in the color grading, where I've gently warmed up those highlights and subtly on the midtones. But then I've tried to cool the shadows, and I think I could, yeah, I don't know about cooling the shadows further, but maybe those mids could be swung around into this bluey green zone. This is why I really recommend you do multiple passes over in your processing, just to refine the colors, the brightness values. When I've opened this up now, I just thought, you know what, it's probably a little bit too warm. So I would make these subtle adjustments where maybe I'll dial back that warming. The mid-tone, instead of being warmer, I'll go into the greens. And then I'm happy to let it sit and come back with fresh eyes later. And eventually you'll reach a point where you're no longer looking at it and feeling like something is off. You'll just hopefully look and enjoy it. That's the point you want to get to. But that point could take 2, 3, 4, 5 different visits. Now these visits that we do, these passes over, might only be 2 minutes at a time. So it's not like it's a very time consuming process. The other thing I wanted to show you guys now on this one, which I've done the actual work on, is all the little brush adjustments I've made. So that's bringing out the light there. This adjustment was lifting those tones. So there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 adjustments. That's without them, and that's with them. So you can see how they all add up to work on the tonality, particularly the midtones. You can see the histogram shifting from the midtones there in order to get that sense of depth and separation. And one of the battles you're always going to have in forest scenes is the chaos of the forest, especially in the distance here where we just have various tones, branches and lines overlapping each other. And that's where I definitely like to go in with the brush and reduce clarity as well. The reduction in clarity somewhat just seemingly smooths it out. Essentially, the reduction in clarity is just reducing the midtones there as well. See, if we increase it, you're getting more contrast. When we reduce it, it's almost like a mid-tone contrast just getting reduced. So it creates the illusion of it looking soft or clarity for argument's sake. But all of this is tonal adjustments, but we're doing it in order to trick the eye to think something is either further away, less distracting, etc. Maybe in the foreground, you could increase clarity because it's closer to the viewer. It would have a heightened amount of detail, but anything off in the distance, you kind of want to make that less distracting and then bring down that tonal range. And even back here where these whites are, that's bringing those highlights down. There's more of a blue back there now. I definitely want the highlights around the sun. That's going to maintain that natural dynamic range we have. And same as the dark shadows in the foreground. But then we're bringing out those mid-level tones in the right areas to show the detail, but hopefully maintain some integrity with how the human eye really sees the scene. All right, hopefully all that made sense anyway, just to give you a bit of an indication of how the raw files can look, how the processing can come together. The processing is where we finish that exposure, so don't be discouraged out in the field if the image isn't really looking like what the eye is seeing or even what your smartphone's capturing. That's where the processing comes in. So I appreciate your support. Please leave any comments, any questions below. It means a lot. Thumbs up and shares help the channel to grow. I look forward to bringing some new videos soon, and let me know what you might want to see on the channel. I'm an open book. I want to help you with your photography and your photography journey. All right, that's enough from me. Cheers.